Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking to you about one of my ongoing topical TBRs. This TBR is specifically going to be focused on, for lack of a better word, the criminal justice system. If you aren't familiar with my ongoing topical TBRs, definitely check out my original video about that. Basically, I have a number of different TBRs that don't have a hard and fast deadline, but they're books that I want to get to at some point that are all based around different things. All of these topical TBRs are at least primarily nonfiction, and my hope is to educate myself both as an activist and a sociologist. So this TBR started out as specifically a prison TBR. I wanted to get a little bit more background, especially around the war on drugs. I thought that that would be good alongside my people of color history TBR. Additionally, I had a book that I knew that I wanted to read that looked at women in prisons, so I just thought adding a couple would make it a whole thing, particularly considering recent events. I really felt like I needed to add a whole lot in on policing specifically as well. The whole system really perpetuates a lot of the same racism and sexism and transphobia and everything else. So a lot of these books touch on different parts of it. Some of these are more history-based, some of them are memoirs, and then I have some that are looking specifically at prison and police abolition. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first one that I have on this list is actually a reread, and that is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. I loved this book. This is such a thorough book. If you aren't really wanting to go, full in-depth like I am, but you still want to have some background, The New Jim Crow is the book to read. I am rereading it in part because it's been a while, but also because this is a new version. It is the 10th anniversary edition. It's got a new intro that I've already had the pleasure of reading, but also my old copy of this is not the prettiest. I read this for class, so I went ahead and bought just the cheapest copy I could find on Amazon. I figured it would, maybe have like marks on it or, something, which I'm fine with. I like reading other people's annotations. But instead, I got what looks like something that someone with maybe some advanced printing stuff printed off, but they didn't think anything about the graphics or actual formatting. If you are, I don't know how well the picture shows up, but that is extremely pixelated. If you look on the inside, the words are so small. So I want to be able to take, the highlights from this book and put them into this one and potentially add new annotations. So that's probably the first thing that I'm going to do, although I say that now and then it's going to change. Now, the rest of them aren't necessarily in order of how I'm going to read them, but they're mostly grouped together loosely by topic. Next on the list, we have Open Season by Ben Crump. This was recommended by Jesse from Bow Ties and Books. This is written by an attorney. This is actually the attorney that's going to be working on George Floyd's case. And this basically just looks at the history of prisons and the criminal justice system in general and how Black people have been targeted in a really huge way. The next book that I have on this list is Building the Prison State: Race in the Politics of Mass Incarceration by Heather Schoenfeld. Like the title states, this is looking at race and kind of the formation of the prison system, and especially how politics shifted kind of around race and why mass incarceration was embraced. Next, I'd like to get to Policing the Black Man: Arrest, Prosecution, and Imprisonment, which is a collection of essays from various criminal justice experts and legal scholars, but it's all edited by Angela Davis. And throughout all these essays, they basically discuss like the state of the criminal justice system and also the negative ramifications that it's had, particularly for Black men. And since we've gotten to Angela Davis, there are actually two more works by her that I would like to read. The first of those is Are Prisons Obsolete? And it's my understanding that she goes through the history and critiques, how it was made and how the origins impact it now, and then also suggesting alternatives for the prison system. The next Angela Davis book that I have is Abolition, Democracy, Prisons, Torture, and Empire. This pulls partly from Angela Davis's experience being in prison. And she also talks about, kind of on a global scale, what prisons have done. So it kind of takes it past just looking at the United States and how this growing trend is impacting people globally. On a similar vein, looking more globally, we have The War on Drugs in the Global Color Line, edited by Kojo Koram. When a lot of people, or at least Americans, think of the war on drugs, I tend to think of it in terms of how it was in the United States, policies that Reagan put in place, and the impact that it had on the Black community. But it's really a lot larger than that. So I'm really excited to learn about this because I really don't know a lot about the global impact of that at all. The next books that I have focus on other specific populations within the criminal justice system. The first is Women Lifers, Lives Before, Behind, and Beyond Bars by Meredith Dye and Ronald Ade. This book I actually bought because I took classes with both of the authors. I got to hear about the research that they did during the classes. I even know some people who use some of that data to do their theses and stuff like that. So I'm excited to get to it on that level, but also a lot of the stuff that they said was really interesting. If my memory serves me correctly, they focus on women in Alabama prisons. Some of the stuff that they found included the number of women who were in these prisons for life were first-time offenders. A lot of them were victims of abuse. So it goes in and looks at kind of the lives of these women and why they're in jail, and really opens up different pieces as to how they were failed by the system. That's at least what I'm expecting. Obviously, I don't know 100% their thesis since this is a TBR list. The next book on prisons that I would like to get to is Invisible No More, Police Violence Against Black Women and Women of Color by Andrea Ritchie. Like the title says, this book focuses not just on women, but on specifically Black women and how they've been treated in regards to police violence. Next, I have Queer Injustice, the Criminalization of LGBT People in the United States. This looks at the history of policy as well as reaction by the police. The issue of criminalization was absolutely a huge piece of gay history. The Stonewall Uprising, which is one of the things that started kind of the trajectory of activism and how it's gone, was a response to police brutality that was facilitated in part by the fact that it was illegal to be gay or to cross-dress whatever the government deemed as cross-dressing. So I'm really excited to get to this book. And in that same vein, we have Captive Genders, Trans Embodiment in the Prison Industrial Complex. This looks specifically at prisons and how they kind of reinforce gender standards. I'm not sure what all specific topics they're going to go into, but I do know that the way that trans people are treated in prison is simply abhorrent. They're often put into places that don't align with their gender identity, and especially trans women face a lot of abuse in prisons, both from guards and inmates alike. Next, we have Disability Incarcerated, Imprisonment and Disability in the United States and Canada. This is another group of people that are continually let down by the criminal justice system. A huge amount of people who are imprisoned and a huge amount of people who experience police brutality are disabled or mentally ill. Additionally, a lot of these institutions aren't built to help people with disabilities or mental illnesses or chronic illnesses. So it'll be really interesting to see what all these books hit on. I do know that there is definitely a history of disability being criminalized. If you look really early on, look up stuff about the ugly laws. People who were not socially acceptable to look at literally could be arrested for being in public. So I'm certain that there's a whole lot to unpack. Next, I have a few memoirs. The first is A Question of Freedom, a memoir of learning, survival, and coming of age in prison by Reginald Dwayne Betts. I have read some of his poetry. In February, I read Bastards of the Reagan Era, and it was breathtaking. The events that he went through were horrific, but his writing is really great, and the amount of allusions that he puts into this, both from stuff like classic literature, but also like hip-hop, it was just so rich in layers, and I really loved it. I'm not 100% sure if I would officially put this on the TBR since it's poetry, but I am really excited to read Felons, which is one of his other poetry books. But this is his memoir in full and what it was like to grow up kind of during the peak of the war on drugs and being in the prison system. The next memoir I have is The Sun Does Shine: How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row by Anthony Ray Hinton. This was one of the people that was represented by Brian Stevenson, who is the author of Just Mercy that I read earlier this year. If you've not read this book and are interested, even tangentially, with anything on this TBR, definitely read this. Anthony Hinton was on death row for a crime that he did not commit, and this is his memoir of that experience. The final memoir on this TBR is Solitary by Albert Woodfox. This book is about his experience spending 40 years in solitary confinement. He is one of the Angola 3 who were accused of killing an officer, but there was no real proof. The things that they tried to find that were proof didn't really make a whole lot of sense. It took a whole lot of time, but eventually he was released from jail. He was one of the many social rights activists that was wrongly imprisoned or accused of various crimes. Another book that's similar to this that I actually put on my History of People of Color TBR is Asada, an autobiography of Asada Shakur. She was another member of the Black Panthers, which is the same as Albert Woodfox. She was accused of killing a police officer despite physical evidence that she couldn't have. However, hers is more of an autobiography, so it talks about her childhood and stuff as well, which is one of the reasons why I put it in the other TBR. I'm not sure how much Solitary hits on the rest of his life, but that one's on this list. A lot of my lists can sort of overlap anyway, so it's fine. The next book that I have is still sort of memoir adjacent, but that is Live from Death Row by Mumia Abdul-Jamal. This is a collection of letters that he wrote from death row. For more about this book and a lot of other really good picks, definitely check out Brianna's Library. I actually learned about this and decided to add it to this list after seeing their most recent video. The majority of these next books specifically focus on police and policing. The first one that I have is Policing the Planet: Why the Policing Crisis Led to Black Lives Matter. This is an anthology that puts together works from organizers as well as scholars. It addresses the problem of over-policing specifically and the ramifications that it's had on the community. The next book that I have along the same vein is The End of Policing. This gives a look at the history of police and the impact of their expanded impact and militarization. Next, we have Who Do You Protect? Who Do You Serve? Police Violence and Resistance in the United States. This is a collection of reports and essays looking at police violence. It looks at the issue of race as well as mental illness, how pregnant people have been treated by the police. It looks at the issues that we're facing, but also potential solutions. This, as well as The End of Policing and possibly Policing the Planet. So I think the last 3 were actually for free on Verso Books. I'm not sure if they're still going to be free by the time I put up this video, but definitely check out their website. They tend to have kind of random ebooks for free here and there anyway, so it's good to check them out. The reason that I was made aware of these books was because they talked about them on their Instagram and put them out for free. Next we have Abolition Now: 10 Years of Strategy and Struggle Against the Prison Industrial Complex. Now, this was put out by a grassroots organization, so I think that that's a really important perspective, especially when we're talking about things kind of analyzing systems, because as important as academic work can be and as activist-oriented as it can be, it's definitely something else to be able to take in information made by and for the people who are really fighting it on the ground. And like the title implies, this looks at strategies that have been utilized. I would imagine that it also looks into possible strategies going forward as well. And then finally, we have Police: A Field Guide. This is basically a guide for understanding language around the police, both in when you're in situations and understanding how to navigate it, but also the power in the language and kind of how we can see certain things within the language that can tell us a little bit more about the system itself, I think. And in general, how to expect when interacting with the police, and I would imagine also within kind of activist spaces. Like I said before, this is a TBR, so I'm not 100% sure what all they're going to cover. So that is all for my prison and police TBR. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought. Additionally, if you have some books that you think would be good to add to this TBR, let me know as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. Bye.